Okay, great. Thank you so much, Laura. It's so great to
Okay.
be back. And we are going to get started right away because we have a lot to see today. Okay, so we are traveling to Egypt today, and we are going to look at some very special tomb paintings, and we're going to connect them to different parts of the Passover story and the Israelite experience in ancient Egypt. So to start, we will be saying this at our Passover Seders Wednesday night. And I have it written here in Hebrew, in English, and hieroglyphics. And there's something that we say in each and every generation, a person is obligated to see himself or herself as if he or she left Egypt. And what I'm hoping to do today is that we'll have that experience through looking at these tomb paintings and really to get a better understanding of what life was like in ancient Egypt, what everyday life was like, and to get a better understanding of what the Israelite experience in ancient Egypt was like. And just to let you know, I do read Hebrew and English. I do not read hieroglyphics, but there's an amazing program where you can put any sentence in English into the program, and it will type it out for you in hieroglyphics. And something very fun about that, as I see my parents are on the call today, which is so nice on the Zoom program, and they might remember this, but every year at our Passover Seder, I write everyone's name on the name cards, on the place cards of their seats. I write them in hieroglyphics, and then I put out a hieroglyphic chart, and everyone has to find their hieroglyphic name and figure out where they're sitting at the table. And that just makes it kind of fun and connects everything to ancient Egypt, which is, something that many people do at their Passover Seder. And we'll be doing that today by looking at some ancient Egyptian paintings. So here we are at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is where the art that we're going to be looking at comes from. So I just spent 2 weeks doing tours and programs at the Met with the ancient Egyptian collection, connecting them to Passover. So anyone who was on my Zoom, I think it was 2 years ago, I did a Passover program for Mirowitz. And in that program, I showed sculptures and models, wooden models, and um, all different kinds of things from ancient Egypt. And I had said that all the things I showed in that program were from ancient Egypt. We have objects as old as 5,000 years old in the ancient Egyptian collection at the Met. And all of the objects that we have in the Met from ancient Egypt are the originals from ancient Egypt. And I talked about how we obtain those objects, which is that the Met has about 30,000 objects from ancient Egypt, which seems like a lot, but the British Museum actually has 80,000. And of course, if you go to ancient Egypt, if you go to Egypt today, there are hundreds of thousands of objects, but many museums around the world, including the St. Louis Art Museum, also has a nice collection of objects from ancient Egypt because, of course, the Egyptians believed in an afterlife and they were buried in their tombs and pyramids with many of their objects for when they came back to life. So those objects are in museums around the world and in Egypt. And the reason that so many museums have these objects is because in the early 1900s, the Egyptian government invited archaeologists from around the world, from museums, from universities, from around the world to set up archaeological digs and allow them to take back some of the objects that they found to their museums. And that happened from about 1900 till the late 1920s, early 1930s. And that's how we have many of our objects. But what we're going to be looking at today are actually ancient Egyptian tomb paintings. Now, those are the only objects in the collection that in the Egyptian art collection that aren't the originals. And I will explain why while we're looking at one of these paintings. So this is one of the tomb paintings. And just to give you an idea, and at the end we'll go on a virtual tour. This is the room that has many of the paintings, and this is me lecturing in front of them. So just to explain the tomb paintings, because they're different than all the other objects that we have in the museum, because these are not the originals. Of course, they were painted on tombs, so they can't be the originals because the originals are still in the tombs. So what happened is when the Met sent their archaeologists in the early 1900s to Egypt to set up archaeological digs, the Met also did something very unique that not all the museums did. They also sent artists along. And starting in 1907, the Egyptian expedition included artists And these artists sat in these tombs from about 1907 till the late 1930s. And they copied exactly what they saw in the tombs. So these paintings that we're going to be looking at today are called facsimile paintings because they're not the originals, but they were done in the early 1900s by museum artists. And it was a group of artists, including Charles Wilkinson and a married couple that we'll talk about, Norman and Nina DeGary's Davies. And they took tracings of the tombs. They used a technique that allowed for nearly exact brushstroke and color replication. And in most cases, the copies reflected the actual scene, including, as we'll talk about, any damage that might have happened over time. Because, of course, the original paintings were done, you know, um, almost 2,000 to 3,000 years before they were copied. And so, of course, there was damage over time. In some cases, there was vandalism over time. So the artists copied the paintings exactly the way they looked when they were painting them between 1907 and the 1930s. So these are amazing replicas of the originals. And in most cases, the paintings in the museum are in better condition than the originals because for anyone who's been to Egypt, I was in Egypt in 1992, and in that time, people would go into tombs, they would touch the walls. So the original paintings in the tombs were exposed to visitors, to vandalism, to weather, to all kinds of things. But the Met paintings that were done between 1907 and the 1930s, they've been hanging in the museum behind glass and not exposed to, light or visitors or environment. So they're actually, many of them are in much better condition than the originals. Now, the museum has about 350 of these colored facsimiles, and we'll be looking at a handful of them today. The original paintings most of them were in tombs located on the Nile's west bank of Western Thebes. There are over 400 tombs in that area. Most of the tombs in that area and the ones we'll be looking at, the paintings from today, are from the New Kingdom, which is from between about 1500 to 1200 BCE. And the museum was most interested in tombs of officials, Valley of the Kings and Valley of the Queens royal tombs, and also artist tombs. So we'll see examples of all those tombs today, paintings from those tombs. And these sites, according to the Met, were the richest source of ancient Egyptian paintings preserved anywhere in Egypt. And as you'll see while we're looking at these paintings, they vary across dynasties and reigns, but they provide insight into daily life, flora and fauna changes, ceremonial and burial customs of that time period. And again, this will give us an idea of the society that the Israelites were living in ancient Egypt. And as I said, the Met has about 350 of these paintings, and they're now one of the key displays in the Met's Egyptian department. As we're looking at the paintings, you'll see that there are many brightly painted images of men and women going about their daily lives and coping with the certainty of death. And you have to understand that when these paintings were done, it was before color photography. So the best way to really make copies of these paintings was not to take a black and white photograph, but was to make paintings of these paintings. Now, first, the artists were doing watercolors, but then they realized that tempera paint was actually most reflective of the original dyes that the ancient Egyptians used. And of course, using tempera paint had an advantage over color photography because they show the immediacy of the originals that were done by the artist's hands. Now, how did they have all this color that they had in ancient Egypt? And that was from different dyes. That was from plants, berries, different insects like aphids. If you squeeze an aphid, you get a red color. Snails give off a purplish color. So they did have a lot of dye, a lot of brightly colored dyes. And you can imagine that the tombs were very brightly colored, very brightly painted. And you'll get a better idea as we're looking at these paintings. Now, again, as I said, these are facsimile paintings, but the color is as similar as they could get to the original. And also remember that any damage that was done was also reflected in these paintings. Okay, so we'll get started and look at some of these paintings. So here's the first one. This is called Hunting from a Chariot. The artist is Charles K. Wilkinson. This painting, the facsimile painting was done in 1922, but the original was done around 1427 to 1400 BCE. So that is already uh, um, 3,500 years ago, more than 3,500 years ago, the painting was made. This one was done with tempera on paper. And I will tell you the size of all these paintings because you'll see that they vary in size, but they all look the same size on my screen. This one is 29 and an eighth inch by 50 inches. So this painting is a hunting scene from a tomb of a man named Usarhat. Now, again, the ancient Egyptians believed in an afterlife, and they believed not only would their objects come back to life with them, but also any scenes that were painted on their tombs would also come back to life. So they wanted scenes of, anything that they wanted to do in the afterlife. They wanted them recreated on their tombs. So this one I think is very interesting. Just again, noticing the color, noticing the style. And also, we see it is a hunting scene. It's a man in a chariot. So the Egyptians started using chariots around 1650 to 1550 BCE. So chariots would have been used around when the Israelites were in ancient Egypt. And the Egyptians used chariots until about 664 BCE. So for about 1,000 years, they were using chariots. And I think what's so interesting about this one is for those of us who are familiar with the song that Moses sang after the splitting of the Red Sea. And there's a sentence in there about the Pharaoh and his chariots. And chariots were certainly something that the ancient Egyptians used to have war. And it made them a very strong country. And here we're seeing that replicated on this tomb painting. Now, the other thing to recognize when you're looking at all these paintings were done in the same style, because in ancient Egypt, for many, many years, the artistic style did not change, which is very different from today when we have different artistic movements. We've had many artistic movements just over, the past 100 years: Impressionism and Post-Impressionism and Cubism and all kinds of different movements. But in ancient Egypt, they really painted the same way, as you'll see, for over 1,000 years. And you'll notice how they painted people, and you'll see this in all of the paintings. I'll point a few of these things out, and then you'll recognize them in all the paintings. They did the profile of the face, except that it's the eye. There's always one forward-facing eye, the frontal shoulders, and then really profile of the legs. And even the animals, look at the horse, right? It's a profile of the horse's face, but the eye is over here. That's how they painted, and you'll see that in all of our paintings. And that they felt that was the best way to show a person, both from a profile and also from a frontal view. So it's a mix of profile and frontal, and you'll see that throughout the paintings. And that was done very specifically. So again, this is the room with some of the paintings. And at the end, we'll do a virtual tour so you can see the room more. But you'll notice the paintings are all different sizes and different scenes, men, women, lots of different colors. And again, they're all painted in a similar way, but the people are a mixture of frontal and profile. Okay, our next painting we're going to look, before we go on to our next painting, actually, this is the couple that I was talking about who are very important as part of the Egyptian artists. Their names are Norman and Nina DeGary's Davies. They were really foremost of the artists of these tempera paintings that we're going to look at, and I'll make sure to tell you who the artists who did them. They were a British couple. They worked for the Met from 1907 well into the 1930s, and they lived in a small house located among the tombs. And you can imagine in the early 1900s what that was like. And they really spent most of their days in these dark, dank tombs, copying paintings exactly what they saw. And of course, they didn't want to use a lot of light to expose the paintings to extra light. So they really worked in pretty difficult conditions, and they did that for many, many years. Norman, who we see over here, was not only an artist copying the images, but he also was able to, he read hieroglyphics. So he was also able to interpret the hieroglyphics in a lot of the paintings, which we'll see. A lot of the paintings have hieroglyphics in them. And even though we know the names of the artists who made the facsimile paintings, we don't know the names of the artists who made the original paintings. We don't know who painted them on the original tombs, unfortunately. Now, Norman and his wife, Nina, who we have here, they had very similar signatures. So it's sometimes hard to know actually which one of them made the paintings. Nina's signature was NA. .degd and Norman's was no.degd. So their signatures were the same except for that one letter. Nina was NA and Norman NO. But some of the signatures just have NDEGD, so it wasn't clear if it was Nina or Norman. But for the ones that I do know, I will let you know who painted the paintings. Okay, so this is our next painting that we're going to look at. This is a very big painting compared to a lot of the other ones we'll look at. Just to tell you the size of it, it's 91 inches high and it's 64 inches wide. This is a painting of Amenhotep, who is a pharaoh. Amenhotep III, and his mother is standing behind him. His mother's name is Mutemuia. So it's Amenhotep III and his mother in a kiosk. This was painted in 1914 by Nina Daguerre Davies, but the original was done sometime between 1390 and 1353 BCE. Of course, that long ago, we don't have exact dates. We have, circa dates with a 40-year range. And it was done, of course, with tempera on paper. Okay, so first I'm going to talk a little bit about this painting. And then I want to also give some general information, more general information about these paintings so we can appreciate them even more. So this is the focal point of an offering scene. This was not found in the tomb of the pharaoh. It was found in the tomb of an official at Thebes, but it would have been very regular to have a painting of the pharaoh in an official's tomb. Just like today, sometimes people might have pictures of, presidents or kings or queens or things like that in their homes. So it would have people, officials, high up officials would have had paintings of the current pharaoh in their tomb. And this shows us the pharaoh Amenhotep III. He is sitting underneath a kiosk. Enthroned underneath a kiosk, and his mother stands right behind him. So one thing that you'll notice is how large the pharaoh is. Of course, he's sitting, but notice the large size of him. And in ancient Egypt, the size indicated importance, both in paintings and in sculptures. So the size, we have many humongous sculptures of pharaohs, and that, of course, indicated their importance. And you can really see that compared to, of course, the size of his mother. But also, if you see beneath, down here, there is a row of foreigners from Nubia and Western Asia. They're praising the king with their hands upraised. And notice the difference in size between our Pharaoh Amenhotep and these foreigners. Now, something else you notice is that his mother is standing right behind him, and she is also quite large, shows how important she was. And women in ancient Egypt, especially the mothers of pharaohs, the wives of pharaohs, were very important, were deemed very important. But in terms of ancient societies, women in ancient Egypt were much higher regarded than in many other ancient societies. Many women could read and write, and women were able to own land in ancient Egypt. So we will see that the size of women in many of these paintings is quite large. And we don't know the name of the tomb owner. We just know it was an official in Thebes. Now, just some other things to notice about this. First of all, the bright colors of this painting. And again, the facsimile paintings are really exact replicas of the ones that were in the tombs. Notice the clothing that they're wearing, the jewelry, the broad collar. This is something a pharaoh would wear. His crown with the cobra on it, a symbol of power. He's also holding the hook and flail that you can see over here. There's hieroglyphics that are written on here, and that allows us to know really what's going on in this painting from all the writing. And again, something I pointed out, notice the way they're painted. Again, the profile of their faces, one eye facing forward, the shoulders are fully frontal, and the legs are profile, so facing the side, even for the people down here. So similar style is here, how they painted in all these paintings. And then you could see the pharaoh's being fanned with these fans. We can't even see who's fanning him, and he's sitting on a throne. Very elaborate colors. Now, the reason that I specifically pointed out this chose this painting, first of all, for the size and the color and everything, is there are many possibilities for who is the pharaoh of the Exodus. And if you Google it, you'll get, I don't know, at least 10 possibilities. But there's, not only was there the pharaoh of the Exodus, but there were multiple pharaohs while the Israelites were enslaved. The Israelite slavery lasted anywhere between 86 to 116 years. So during that time period, there were multiple pharaohs. Now, we don't know the exact date of the Exodus. It's dated anywhere by scholars from 1446 BCE to the mid 1200s BCE. So there's like a 200-year span of when the Exodus might have occurred. But depending on the timing, it is very possible that this pharaoh, Amenhotep III, was a pharaoh during the time of the Israelite oppression. So it's interesting to see this painting. It is from that time period, and to imagine the possibility that perhaps he was one of the pharaohs of oppression. The other thing that we can see that often pharaohs are shown holding a hook and flail, which is like a stick and this flail over here. And if you think about stories about Moses in the Bible, many times he is mentioned with his stick. And in fact, he does sometimes certain things happen with a stick, like he throws it to the ground and it turns into a snake. And there are many people who make comparisons between Moses' stick and the Pharaoh's hook and flail, which we see here. So it's something that you can now see visually and make that connection. Okay, while we're looking at this painting, I just want to point out a few other things about the facsimile painting. So first of all, the paintings show the history of painting. As I said, the Met has 350 of these facsimile paintings. The originals some of them were done 4,000 years ago, which is just amazing. And many of them show us about everyday life. Many of them show us about pharaohs and their importance. And as you're looking at them, as I said before, they're really very accurate copies of the originals. The line, the shape, the color, the scale, they're also trying to really show us. Now, as we'll see in some of the later paintings, this one's in great condition, but we'll see some of the other paintings are damaged. And again, that might have been due to vandalism, that might have been due to weather, that might have been due to jealousy of other rulers, or disagreement with subject matter. There was also an underground illegal trade of pieces of wall paintings. So there were lots of things that might have happened to these paintings. Now, the artists who did these paintings, they did take black and white photographs, but those are not as good as these facsimile paintings. And as I said, the first paintings were done in watercolor, but the ones we're looking at are all done in tempera. The original Egyptian artists, of course, their pigment was limited because they only had their dyes. They also kept their colors in different bowls. They would use different brushes for each of the dyes and then apply them. And the Egyptian artists, the original Egyptian artists, when they were making this painting, they worked in very orderly ways. They planned the overall scheme in advance. They executed it in different stages. Now, often in tombs, as you can imagine, the decoration was left unfinished because when the owner died, the work on the tomb stopped. So we do have a lot of unfinished paintings in the original tombs. But the original Egyptian artists did preliminary drawings, and the tomb owners and sometimes the wives and gods were, as I showed you, are the largest figures. The sons and daughters, as we'll see, are sometimes on smaller scale to show their significance. And a lot of the facsimile paintings also have borders, which were drawn freehand. We can see some of these borders up here. So that's how a lot of the originals were done. And again, the Met artists copied them exactly, even with the defects. And that's what we'll be looking at today. So that's just a little bit about how these paintings were done. So you have an idea. The other thing to keep in mind is who had these decorated tombs and brightly colored tombs were usually the most affluent Egyptians, the pharaohs, the officials, and the Egyptian artists painted them for the everlasting benefit of their owners, of course, who expected to live in the afterworld, and they wanted to live the same life as they had on Earth. So the scenes, as we'll see, show people daily life, enjoying the world with their family. A lot of the scenes show funerary rites. and the journey to the next life, which we'll look at also. But we'll see that the Egyptian artist recorded daily activities in detail and really painted them on a very flat form, as we can see also. They're very flat. That's how they painted it in ancient Egypt. It's almost like a frieze-like procession, as we'll see with paintings with more people. And again, in their portrayal of the human figures, you can see the Egyptian artists show us, as I pointed out, two points of view. The head and the legs are usually in profile and the shoulders frontal. And for us, it might look awkward. And that's why I think people do that, walk like an Egyptian kind of dance. And it looks awkward to us, but to those artists, it showed that they could show us what was going on in the scene. In most of these paintings, the message is truthful, but of course, you'll see there is artistic license going on, and especially with the color. And we will talk about that as we're going through the paintings. Okay, so let's look at some more paintings with that background in mind, all the things I just spoke about. And now, as you look at the paintings, you will have a deeper understanding of many of them. Okay, so here's our next painting. This is one of my favorites. This is Queen Nefertari playing Senet. This was done, the original is circa 1279 to 1213 BCE. And it was done during the reign of Ramses II, better known as Ramses the Great. This one was done by Nina Daguerre's Davies, and it's tempera paper, and the size is much smaller than our last one. This is, the height is 16 inches, and the width is 18 inches. So it's a much smaller painting. Now, this one, I'm going to talk about it a little and then make connections. So Nefertari was the great royal wife, or the principal wife of Ramses II, otherwise known as Ramses the Great. Her importance to the king is very evident, not only in this painting, but also Ramses the Great made many large sculptures to honor her. And being a principal wife was a very important role, especially for Nefertari, because Ramses the Great had over 200 wives and concubines and over 100 children. And the reason that's important for our story is because many people say that Ramses the Great was the pharaoh of the Israelite oppression and possibly also of the Exodus. And this painting is of his principal wife. So the principal wife was the first wife and usually the favorite wife. And that's who we're looking at here. So this facsimile painting actually comes from this painting comes from Nefertari's tomb. So this is from her actual tomb. And we're looking here at the queen sitting in front of a table, playing a very popular game in ancient Egypt called Senet, but she's playing against an invisible opponent. There's no one opposite her. So Senet was actually a very popular game in life. The Met owns a Senet set. So it was a very popular game in life, but when it's painted on a tomb like it is here, it has symbolic meaning. The word Senet means passing, and the game here was seen as a parallel to the journey into the afterlife and the obstacles that one has to overcome on the way. So she's kind of moving these obstacles out of her way on her way to the afterlife. So looking at this scene, we see Nefertari. She's wearing an elaborately pleated and fringed gown of sheer linen. She's also wearing a lot of jewelry. She's wearing a gold bracelet. She's wearing a broad collar, but that both men and women wore. She's also wearing probably silver earrings. And on her head is the vulture headdress of a queen. So first of all, we're seeing a lot of details here of the jewelry, the clothing. And as you're looking at the painting, notice the expertise and of the ancient Egyptian painters and artists, what they're painting, all the details, the sheer dress, the folds of the dress, the jewelry. Of course, we know a lot of the details of what's going on here from all the hieroglyphics that you can see, which are quite large over here. You can see her sitting on the chair. And again, as I pointed out, profile of her face, of her feet, frontal shoulders, and of course, always one eye. So as I said, this was painted by Nina Daguerre's Davies. And just, again, a little history of Nefertari. She was an Egyptian queen. She was the great royal wife or principal wife of Ramses the Great. She's one of the best known Egyptian queens. Among many of us are familiar with Cleopatra, Nefertiti and Hatshepsut, but she's also a very well-known Egyptian queen, and she's one of the most prominent um, uh, woman that she also had power in her own right. She was highly educated. She was able to both read and write hieroglyphics, which, although women were able to do at the time, was not a large amount of the population was able to. And she used these skills in her diplomatic work. She corresponded with other prominent royals of the time. She has a very lavishly decorated tomb. It's one of the largest and most spectacular in the Valley of the Queens. And Ramses the Great also constructed a temple for her at Abu Simbel next to his colossal monument there. Nefertari married Ramses II before he ascended the throne, and she had at least 4 sons and 2 daughters, which was a lot of children for one wife at the time. Now, interestingly, as you're looking at this, as I said, Senet was a very popular game in ancient Egypt. Queens like Nefertari may have played it using a game box, but ancient Egyptians who were not as wealthy would not have had this game box. They probably would have scratched a grid on the floor and played the game on the floor. What's amazing is, as I said, we have one Senet set in the Met, and it does have the game box, which means that we don't know who it came from, but we know it came from a wealthier person because it did have the box. So again, the connection here is a strong one because, as I said, many people, including Rabbi Dr. Josh Berman, who at the end of today's talk, I'm going to show you a Haggadah that he put out. But he is a rabbi, a historian, an archaeologist, and he leads trips to Egypt, connecting Egypt to the Israelite experience. And he is one who says that Ramses the Great was the pharaoh of the Exodus of that time period. So just to get an idea of this Ramses the Great, who Nefertari was married to, as I said, I went to Egypt in 1992. This is a picture of when I went to Egypt, unfortunately before digital cameras. So I just took one picture of this amazing site. But this is a sculpture of Ramses the Great that we're talking about. This is me next to Ramses' head. And I said, this is a sculpture in Egypt. And this is my friend that I traveled with lying down next to a sculpture of Ramses. Notice that she is the size of his fist. Okay, these are huge sculptures in Egypt. This one was originally standing when Ramses was the pharaoh, but you'll notice that there's damage to the leg. There started to be some erosion to the stone of his leg, so they had to lie it down. These sculptures, some of these sculptures were up to 60 feet high, humongous sculptures. As I said, in ancient Egypt, the size of the sculpture or the painting indicated the importance. And of course, Ramses the Great thought he was very great and had these huge sculptures. So just to imagine, if he was the pharaoh of the Exodus, which, by the way, anyone who's seen Prince of Egypt, that's what DreamWorks says also. Although I don't rely on DreamWorks for my information, but you can imagine if Ramses the Great was the pharaoh, seeing this huge sculpture in Egypt when they were enslaved would have been extremely scary, and certainly a way to control a population of slaves. So this just gives you an idea of Ramses the Great, the possible pharaoh of the Exodus, and his very important wife, Nefertari, who we have in this painting. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next painting, back to the Met, back to facsimile paintings. There are a number of paintings of funeral processions that are that were found in tombs. And of course, that was very important to ancient Egyptians because they did believe in an afterlife. They prepared for their deaths their entire life. They prepared their tombs, and that artists and artisans working on their tombs their entire life, because of course, no one knows when they're going to die. So you have to prepare, especially if you're wealthy and you're a pharaoh, from the beginning. So we have a lot of paintings of funeral processions. This one is from the tomb of a man named Peri. The original painting was done circa 1390 to 1352 BCE during the reign of Amenhotep. And this copy was made by Nina Degaris Davies. The size is 19 inches high and 75 inches long. These are very long paintings. So this painting shows 2 scenes in the tomb of Peri at Thebes. The upper register shows a funeral procession in which Perry is being transported to the tomb inside his coffin. And what's amazing about this, again, is these paintings really show us about what life was like in Egypt. We really have a lot of understanding about what life was like in ancient Egypt. And again, this is the time period, all the paintings I'm showing you is the time period that the Israelites were in ancient Egypt. So these are things they would have seen around them. You'll also notice in these paintings a lot of slaves. It's possible some of them were Israelite slaves. We don't know exactly because Egypt had a lot of slaves. That's how they were able to build the things that they build and create all the things that they created. But you'll notice, again, all the things I pointed out in terms of the way the artist painted people, both profile and frontal, different things that they brought to the tomb. Here you can see that they're bringing the mummy of Perry inside his coffin. And the lower part, by the way, is showing us from right to left various stages in a ceremony called the opening of the mouth ceremony. That was part of the mummification process. And you can really see all the details in the mummification process over here, which is really just quite detailed and quite instructive of how the mummification process took place. So the other thing I had said is that most of the tomb paintings do come from tombs of pharaohs or high up officials, important people. But we do have some tomb paintings, and this is one of my favorite ones that we're looking here, that came from a craftsman tomb. So sometimes overseers of workers would get together and they would create their own tomb. And this is what we have here. This is craftsman. It's from a tomb of two men named Nebumam and Ipuki, and they were overseers. We can see one of them here. I don't know if this is Nebumam or Ipuki, but it's one of them. And the reason we know he's the overseer is, look, he's twice the size of all of the workers. Okay, again, size indicates importance. So I'm going to point out a bunch of things here. First of all, I think this is amazing. Again, it's a craftsman tomb. It shows us how they created art in ancient Egypt. And I will do some details, but I just want to point out a couple things. This is a man carving a sphinx. And remember, this is how they made things 4,000 years ago or more than that. Carved these amazing sculptures like the one we saw of Ramses the Great when my picture in Egypt, using a hammer and chisel, which was a rock and a nail. They're making these amazing sculptures out of. We see people making musical instruments. We see making jewelry, weighing gold, doing some painting. So it's amazingly detailed. Again, notice every person in profile with one eye we can see, legs to the side. And of course, the craftsman or the owner of the tomb is sitting here. We see he's more important because of his size, also what he's wearing. He's wearing jewelry, he's wearing clothing. Now, as I said, the artists who made these facsimile paintings copied them exactly. So a lot of damage occurred to this painting. You can see a lot of damage. Again, I don't know whether it was, elements, whether it was the, weather, or whether it was vandalism. Now, we know for sure that this part was vandalism because this was specifically, it looks like his face was kind of scratched out. And that often happened. As we know with sculptures, many times the face was defaced or the nose was broken off of. We have many Egyptian sculptures where the nose was broken off. That a lot of people did to take away the power of the person or if they didn't like them. It happened in tomb paintings also. Someone did not like this overseer and they scratched out his face. Maybe one of his workers did that. But you can see specifically that that was done. And we'll see that in some of the other paintings also. So again, the facsimile artist copied the paintings exactly as they saw. Let's see some details. I have this one where we can see some close-ups, which is amazing. Again, you can see he's carving a sphinx with a rock and a nail. That's how Egyptian artists made all of those sculptures in ancient Egypt. You can see them painting on pottery, making instruments, making furniture, all these things that they're preparing for tombs and for other things. A lot of furniture was made here also in these craftsman workshops. And here again, we can see a close-up, see how the face was specifically scratched out. We can see they're weighing gold over here and really the details of what they're wearing, what all these workers and slaves are wearing. So again, it gives us an idea of what life was like in ancient Egypt, how art was made, what people wore, the indication of importance, all these things about Egyptian society we can learn from the paintings. Okay, we're going to move on to our next painting, which is from the same tomb as our last painting. This is also from the tomb of Nebumam and Ipuki. And this is Purifying and Mourning the Dead. The artist who did this one was Charles Wilkinson. He painted this between 1920 and 1921, but the original tomb painting, was done between circa 1390 to 1349 BC. Also, this is a small painting. It's our small painting fragment. It's 15 1/4 inches high by 32 inches long. And this is part of the funeral scene in the tomb of Nebumam and Ipuki. And the scene depicts the funerals of both of these men who actually died at different times. So when one died, he was buried, but they didn't close up his tomb until the second one died. So they had time to do a lot more paintings. And this scene, as I said, is from the tomb of the overseers of the sculptors. So the overseers of the workmen. And it shows, it's very interesting. And the reason we know all this, by the way, is from all the hieroglyphics you can see here. So apparently, Nebumam and Ipuki were, at different times, they were each married to the same woman. Okay, and she's shown both here and here. So we see her on the right as a much younger woman, and she's caressing the feet of Ipuki's mummy over here. And then when her second husband, Nebumam, died, she was much older. You can see her here. She's older. She's crouching at the feet of Nebumam's mummy. She's casting dust on her head, which was a universal sign of mourning. So again, all these details really show us and tell us about what life was like in ancient Egypt. And the different things we were talking about. What I find so interesting about this is not only are all the people painted, as I said, profile of the face with one eye facing forward and the legs, but even the mummy, right? We see the profile of the mummy with one eye, feet facing sideways. So I think, they were very, very regulated with how they painted over a long period of time. Okay, so here's a detail, just so again you can see that, again, the color, the color that they had in ancient Egypt was really quite amazing, that this all came from the original color, all came from dyes. And of course, the facsimile artist painted using the same colors that they saw in the original paintings. But just seeing all the detail is just quite amazing. Okay, our next painting is a wonderful painting. It's also a rare example of a landscape painting in Egyptian art. This is really the only landscape painting we'll be looking at. And this painting is the east wall, the south side of Nocht's offering chamber. This is Nocht over here, so it's from his tomb. The original painting was made between 1410 and 1370 BCE. And the copy, the facsimile painting, was made between 1908 and 1910 by Norman de Gary's Davies. So this painting is really a remarkable painting. I will show you some close-ups, but let's look at the whole painting first. It is very busy. It's a very busy painting. There's a lot going on here. And it's a very busy and complex rendering of agrarian life in ancient Egypt. Now, that was the way of life for all but a tiny fraction of the Egyptian population. So it's very important to understand what agrarian life was like. And that is something, of course, that the ancient Israelites would have been involved in, and also what they would have seen around them. So it's important to get a visual understanding of what was going on. So, of course, you can already figure out many things on your own about this painting. Of course, Nocht and his wife are the tallest people in the painting everywhere. They're much taller than all of their workers. Interesting, I find his wife is just as tall as he is. So, as I said, women had a very compared to other ancient societies, women had a very high up role in ancient Egypt. She is standing behind him, but she's just as tall as he is, which indicates she's just as important as he is. Now, they are often making offerings here, like over here, they're making an offering, but they're also watching, or definitely Nocht is watching, different things going on in his field. So here you see Nocht again under the green canopy he's sitting, and here you see Nocht again down here. Again, you'll always notice it's him for a few reasons, not just his size, but look how differently he's dressed and adorned compared to all of his workers, right? They're wearing necklaces, both of them broad collars, different bracelets, and the workers are not wearing that kind of jewelry. So again, it's very busy. Nacht, we know, lived around 1420 BCE, and he was owner of many fields and very involved in agrarian life. The other interesting detail I'm just going to point out is notice at the top of the painting, we can see the design and it represents the knotted ends of a textile. So the artists are almost trying to show us that this is a textile by showing us all these knots up here, which I think is just an amazing detail. Okay, so what is Nock doing? He's overseeing a harvest in this register. In this register, I'll notice he's sitting under a green canopy. He has shade. He's not working. He's overseeing all of his workers working. There are actually, you might have found there are two women, two female workers here against the backdrop of a green field. And they are actually harvesting flax, which was always, that was a women's job. All the other workers you can see in this painting are men, but the women were responsible for harvesting the flax. In the bottom right corner over here, Nacht is again under the canopy, and look at what the people are doing, what he's overseeing. We can see men are plowing, they're sowing, they're hoeing the soil, they're planting seeds and trees. And again, this is so important because it shows us, how they did all these things in ancient Egypt. How did they sow? How did they plant? How did they plow? How did they harvest flax? All the things that you can see going on here, what kind of harvest they had. And again, we have all this information because we can see the hieroglyphics up here, very detailed. Also the color, amazing. Again, it's a replica of the colors that they had in ancient Egypt. And you get an idea, if anyone's been to Egypt and seen the tombs, they're very brightly painted, but you get an idea of how brightly painted they are here. Again, it's a very rare landscape in Egyptian art. It's a very lively landscape. We also see the fertility of the land along the banks of the Nile River, which made Egypt such advanced and well-off society because of the Nile River and allowing the fertility along the Nile River. There are also leafy trees that we see in this painting, which indicates the bounty of the land. And again, Nacht has this painted on his tomb walls because he wanted to have this life in the next life. He wanted to have the benefits of such fertile land and so many workers and such a fertile lifestyle in the afterlife. So that's why it is so incredibly detailed. I think I have some details here. Again, here's Nacht and his wife. And all the things that we talked about, and he's giving an offering from all the bounty of his land, which we can see a lot of the fruits and vegetables and wheat that he is privy to. And this is also detail from the bottom. Again, just seeing the details of the tools that they use, the hoeing and the plowing and the seeding, all the tools that they use. Again, I think it's so amazing that even the animals are painted, with profile, but you can see one eye. And the importance of Nacht that, he's twice the size of his workers, right? Look, you can only see his legs in this register, and it's the size of his workers. So you really see Egyptian society was very hierarchical, and you see this very much represented in these paintings. Okay, I think we have one painting left because I want to make sure to leave time for questions also. This is our last painting. This is Mena and his family hunting in the marshes. This came from the tomb of Mena. I'll give you a little background, but as I am, you'll on your own already be able to recognize a number of things based on what we've talked about. The original painting was painted between 1400 and 1352 BCE. Again, all these paintings are taken from the time period that the Israelites were in ancient Egypt. The artist was Nina Degaris Davies, and the size, it's a larger one. It is 39 3/4 inches high and 74 inches wide. Again, this is a copy of the original, and it shows the tomb owner, and that's Mena. This is actually Mena and his family on both sides, and it shows Mena and his family fishing and fowling in the papyrus marshes. To our left, we can see Mena is holding birds in one hand, and he raises a throw stick in his other hand. And on the right, he's using a long spear to catch two large fish that we see here, most likely tilapia fish. Now, first of all, as you're looking at these paintings, as I said at the beginning, they do try and resemble everyday life, but a lot of things are definitely embellished. Certainly, I'm not sure that Mena was, catching birds with his bare hand or, spearing fish so easily. But again, this is what he wanted to be doing in the next life with his family. Hunting was a favorite pastime. Now, in both of these scenes, and again, it's Mena's family on both sides, in both of these scenes, he's poised on the deck of his boat with members of his family. We don't know exactly, but we do know that the woman behind him, this is probably his wife, again, the same size, just standing behind him, but also maybe some of his children on the boat. And then also some workers. Again, you can see the hierarchy in terms of their size. Mena and his wife, the biggest, children next, and then their slaves or servants. Something else you might have noticed is Mena's face is scratched out. Just didn't happen because of time or the environment. That was definitely happen on purpose. Somebody didn't like Mena and specifically scratched out his face because you can see there's really very little other vandalism to this or to this painting. So this was definitely done on purpose. The other thing that you will notice is the way the Nile River was painted, right? The zigzag lines of the water, and you could see that the fish were painted. The fish were painted on top. Notice all the river is teeming with wildlife. We have birds, we have fish. There's even a crocodile here. We have a mouse over here. We have some other animals. So it shows that the Nile River was very teeming with wildlife. And it shows all the things that Mena hopes to catch in his hunting scene. Now, again, it looks like someone doesn't like this guy either because his face was scratched out. But all the things we talked about in terms of how they're painted and the profile versus the frontal, the clothing that they're wearing versus what the slaves are wearing. I'm just going to, it looks like by accident someone painted on our painting. So I'm just going to remove that for a minute. Okay, and all these details. Again, this is a scene that Mena would have wanted to take place in real life, so he had this painted on his tomb painting. So this is the last painting that we are going to look at together. This is just a picture of me in the museum pointing out the Mena painting. And just to give you an idea of how the paintings are hung in the museum, a little bit, they wanted to show how it looked like in a tomb because you had many paintings in tombs, sometimes one over the other. But you see the variety of paintings, the color, the brightness, and you get to see that in these pictures. The other thing I just want to do before we open up to questions is just jump into the museum for 1 minute. And as many of you know, anyone who's been on my tours before, you know that the virtual tour, the colors are not like they are in my images. And it's a little harder to see, but I think it's just important to see the room. As I said, the Met has over 350 of these facsimile paintings. This is one of the hallways with many of the paintings, and the hallway is in the same area where the Grace Rainey Rogers Auditorium is, where there are a lot of lectures and things like that. But just to give you an idea, so we saw this painting of Amenhotep III and his mother. And again, you saw them in their bright color. The virtual tour is a little bit grainy, but I just want to give you an idea of what it looks like if you go down this hallway with all the paintings, one on top of the other. We saw this one also. This is the workman, the tomb of the overseer. And as you go down this hall, it's filled with these facsimiles. We have another room of these paintings also, but most of the paintings are in this room. And just so you can see a few of them that we saw today and what they look like hanging in the museum. Let's see, I think this is the one. Yes, this one right in front of me is the one of Nacht and his wife and the landscape and the agrarian one. But this gives you an idea of what they look like, all the paintings that we have in this hallway. And for those of you who have a chance to visit the Met, if you want to go visit these paintings in person. And again, these paintings really show us what life was like in ancient Egypt and give us an idea of what it was like for the Israelites, what they saw around them, how the farming went, how building and all the work, and allows us to imagine what their lives might have been like. And that is, something that we do on Passover, to imagine ourselves as if we were leaving Egypt, in Egypt and leaving Egypt. Before I open up to question, I mentioned this Haggadah here. Let's see if I can. This is a Haggadah that just came out. It is called the it's called Echoes of Egypt. I'm going to take off the screen share, and let me see. I'm going to see if I can actually take off my background just so you can see it well. I don't think it's letting me do that. But anyway, it's called Echoes of Egypt. You can see it's got a lot of really amazing Egyptian paintings. It's called Echoes of Egypt, a Haggadah by Josh Berman. And there's actually a St. Louis connection, which is the reason that I'm highlighting this Haggadah, besides that it's fantastic, and I'm planning to use it at my Seder this year. It was actually dedicated by a St. Louis family, the Zimbalist family. And the dedication reads, it mentions St. Louis in the dedication. It says, "We're privileged to dedicate Echoes of Egypt to Haggadah with appreciation and gratitude for the legacy of our Zimbalist family Seders in St. Louis, Missouri." So this brand new Haggadah, which is getting a lot of, it's very popular and being bought by many people, has a St. Louis connection. And I think some of you on the call today do know Stuart and Betsy Zimbalist. I know Betsy was a docent at the St. Louis Art Museum for many years. And she actually brought me in to do a program there about ancient Egypt. So I think the connections with St. Louis and with ancient Egypt are many, and I did want to highlight this special Haggadah. Okay, so now if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to open up to questions.
Elana, I put everybody up on the screen that we can fit because we have a very big turnout today. So I do know that someone put something in the chat room at the beginning of the program. I think it was Lee. And if you could take a look at that and see her question.
Oh, I think maybe it looks like a brick, but it was actually a special headdress of a pharaoh. I'm happy to go back to it. Let me do that. Hold on. It was the
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, so it's supposed to, it's a special type of crown with a vulture on it over here. So I think you're seeing, it looks like a brick, but I think you're seeing the crown part. It's not, it's differentiated from the pharaoh's crown because it had to be different because she was the mother. But that's the shape of it, and then it has a vulture on it over here.
Okay. Okay, so can we go back to having everybody there? I want to make sure I have not missing anybody's question.
There we go.
Does anybody else have a question? I'm checking to see. I don't see anybody.